Hello, dear viewers. Happy Monday. So, when I was a child, I used to draw cartoons, like all children. And I used to always think that I was cheating um, if I had to erase anything or redo any part of my drawing. I thought that I had to get it right that first time. And if I didn't, I would have to throw that drawing out and start a new one. So that turned out not to be true. And I know that sometimes writers, adult writers, feel the same way about their writing too. Like either it's perfect that first time, or they have to put it away. So today I want to show you how that's not true. We touched upon it last week, in the interview with Eric Fisher Stone, and he was talking about how even if bits of a first draft are salvageable, that can lead to a second draft and to a masterpiece, right? So, one of the most important things you can learn as a writer is that no matter how good or how bad your first draft is, revising is vital for it to become what it truly wants to be, what it truly can be. Susan Sontag says that although the writing and the rereading, the rewriting and the rereading sound like effort, they can actually be the most pleasurable parts of the writing process. She says that setting out to write, if you have the idea of literature in your head, is formidable. It's scary, it's intimidating. She calls it a plunge in an icy lake. She says that rewriting is like the warm part. She says when you already have something to work with, grapple with, upgrade, edit, even if it's a mess, you have a chance to fix it. I agree with her because, in some ways, rewriting is just so much more reassuring. It's not as scary as the terror of a blank page, making something out of nothing. Nabokov says, I have rewritten, often several times, every word I've published. My pencils outlast their erasers. This is from Speak Memory. Um, Let me show you some famous examples of revision. Let me pull it up and share my screen so that you can see them too. So here is "O Captain, My Captain" as Whitman revised it. You can see here, for example, he has he's cut out the original "Leave you not the little spot" and edited to "Oh, the bleeding drops of red." Over here, you can see "This arm I push beneath you" to "beneath your head," which works much better if you read it. "This arm I push beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead." So you see how much of a difference that made, right? Here's revision. Here we have Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's manuscript of The Adventures of Devil's Foot, which was his favorite novel. And here I'm revising what I wrote for my notes, putting a missing parentheses. And you can see here how his is a little bit, it's a lot tidier than my revision process, for example, but he's cut things out, he's added a few things. And it's his favorite novel, and he still had to go through some revision for it. Here's what mine would look like if I wrote by hand and revised by hand. It's a lot messier. You can see how much work she put into it. By she, of course, it's Jane Austen, and this is Persuasion. All right. Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay. So I'm also really fascinated by how famous songs were finished in several drafts. So here's Yesterday, which Paul McCartney says is the best song he's ever written. And he said, I woke up with a lovely tune in my head. I thought, that's great. I wonder what it is. There was an upright piano right next to him, right next to the bed by the window. And so he tried to work. He got up, he sat down on the piano as soon as he woke up to try and capture that tune. And then he says, I liked the melody a lot because I dreamed it. But because I dreamed it, I couldn't believe I'd written it. I thought, no, I've never written like this before. But I had the tune, which was the most magic thing. And he asked himself, where did it come from? And so he worked on it, he got the essence, and he said that this rare piece of music that just arrived to him was like an egg being laid, not a crack or a flaw in it. He wanted to make sure that the memory of the song wouldn't go away, so he wrote some simple words to go along with the phrasing of the melody line. And here you'll see that even though the song arrived with the music perfect, the lyrics took a lot of revision. So originally, he just put some simple words to snag the melody to make sure he wouldn't forget it and lose it. And the lyrics used to go, scrambled eggs, oh my baby, how I love your legs. Not the version of yesterday that we know. And so John Lennon says that the song was around for months and months before they finally completed it. He says, Paul wrote nearly all of it, but we just couldn't find the right title and the lyrics. Every time we got together to write songs or for a recording session, this would come up. We called it Scrambled Eggs, and it became a joke between us. We almost had it finished when we made up our minds that only a one-word title would suit, and believe me, we just couldn't find the right one. Then, one morning, Paul woke up and the song and the title were both there, completed. I know it sounds like a fairy tale, but it's the plain truth. It might sound like a fairy tale, how this song magically appeared, but even then, a lot of revision went into forming the song that we now know. All right. What I will also do is I will show you some of my own writing so that you can see how many revisions it went through. I want to show you something short. I want to show you something that I have documented proof of revision. And so let's look at this poem. I'm going to share my screen with you again. Okay. So here's the original. This is not even the first draft. This is probably the 5th or 6th draft. This was after I'd already worked on it a great deal, just so you know. But this is what I have. This is what I have sort of documented proof of. All right. So here's one version. You see there's one edit up here. Here's another 3 edits. Next time I looked at it, I made 15 edits. And as we go on, you can see how many more edits I made, right? 29 edits. 27 more. You can see I've lost some lines here. I've gotten rid of them. So a lot of the time, the first thing you write in any kind of writing, this can be academic writing, it can be poetry, it can be prose. A lot of the time, a lot of writers, the first thing they write, the original opening, introductory sentence, first paragraph, first stanza, first line, you don't actually need them on the page. You needed them, you needed to write them, you needed to put them down, you needed to think them so that you could write the poem or the story. You needed it to process it, right? That initial section is like kind of like letting, if you have a teapot and you lift the lid a little bit and some of the steam comes out and then you can pour it carefully, it's kind of like that. So as you can see, I removed these first lines about water being a human right, how often the impoverished aren't even considered human. And I removed them, but even though those were the first lines in the poem and perhaps the first lines I wrote, because as I've worked on the poem, I saw that the rest of the poem illustrated this. It already did this work. So that's one of the things you can do, for example, in the revision process. And so on and so forth, this poem gets edited, right? Um, there were a lot of edits even after, but I don't know if I can access them. So I will just show you. So there were a total of 136 edits that you see just in the course of the few days. I didn't have a lot of time when I was editing this poem. I had a few minutes to steal every other day. So you can see kind of me sneaking time away from, my real job or whatever to edit this poem. And the final version, I think, all right, there may have been a version after this. The final version looks quite different from this version here. I changed the formatting. It's much sparer. It's much leaner. There are much there. It's really it really went through a huge process of trimming down, of paring things away. Yeah, so you can see how the revision process can take something that was perhaps rough, that was perhaps overwordy, that was honestly initially just an idea, just a thought, right? And really, really transform it into completely different finished product. Okay, I will stop sharing my screen. So as you consider revision, one of the first thing I think everybody should do is read your own work aloud. This is vital. It will transform your work. It will transform your writing at a really fundamental level. This is what makes a difference between a reader being unable to put down your work, just drawn from one sentence to the next, just enraptured by each sentence, forgetting even that they're reading somebody's writing and really feeling like they're immersed in a world, or a reader just getting kind of frustrated and distracted and putting it away, and some of them not even knowing why. As author Ruth Rendell says about why she reads her work aloud when she edits, if anything sounds sort of clumsy and not possible to read aloud to oneself, it's not going to work on the page. I even share this advice. I even encourage my students and have them do it in front of me sometimes, even with academic writing. It's especially important for novice writers. It's important for everybody, but especially important for novice writers. See, the more you do it, the more you'll develop a natural ear for catching grammar issues, clunky things. You'll find things that are unbeautiful, that are maybe even tedious. You'll catch unintentional repetition of words, or just little details that don't gleam, that make the writing feel a little bit tired and unpolished. So Francine Prose says in Reading Like a Writer, for any writer, the ability to look at a sentence and see what is superfluous, what can be altered, revised, expanded, and especially cut is essential. It's satisfying to see that sentence shrink, snap into place, and ultimately emerge in a more polished form. Clear, economical, sharp. And really, in order to develop this ability, you can do two things. One, just read a lot, a lot, a lot. You will naturally start to develop a sense of how good sentences, tasty sentences, sentences that are pleasurable to read are formed. The second thing, like I said, is you can read your work aloud. You will really be able to get a sense, get a feeling for how to pare down, how to edit, how to transform your writing at a sentence level. Next week, I want to talk to you more about sentence level edits, but also about larger scale, broader, wider revisions and editing as well. But for today, I think this is a good thing to focus on. I think it's a good thing to focus on getting comfortable with the idea of revision and starting by reading your work aloud. So today's writing prompt is going to encourage you to do just this. Find an old piece of writing. Make sure it's an older piece of writing, not something maybe you wrote today. It's good to give yourself space between drafts. So find an old piece of writing, set a 7-minute timer, read it aloud, and then edit it, paying attention to the following. Does it sound clunky? Does it sound like there is unproductive repetition? Could it feel more true and real? Can the dialogue be more natural? And do you run out of breath? As you're reading it aloud, do you start to get breathless? If so, you might want to consider punctuation. If this is too overwhelming, all these details I've given you, simply read your writing aloud. If you're doing it on the computer like I will be, which means you might have to see my face kind of up close, just edit as you go along. If you're doing it by hand, you can cross things out, kind of like the drafts I showed you by the famous writers. You can add things, you can put in punctuation, sort of start to instinctively edit as you're reading your work aloud. All right, I'm gonna get my timer. And I will mute myself as I'm reading the work aloud, but I will be reading the work aloud with you. And I'll make sure I have it ready. All right, my timer is set. My piece is up on the screen. I'm going to start reading it aloud and editing. Here's our timer. We are done. So I hope you found that useful. Even if it was uncomfortable at first, please, please, please trust that it works. It really does. And the more you do it, the more it'll help your writing, the more it'll support and nourish your writing, the more it'll help you craft your writing into what you really, really are capable of, the amazing things you are capable of doing. Okay, that's all for this week. We are going to talk more about revising, rewriting, and editing in next week's episode. Have a wonderful week. Happy Monday and take care.